I had worked at Grant & Co., one of those shiny corporate towers that scrape the sky and crush souls beneath. You know the kind: cold floors, fake smiles, and 1,000 people pretending not to notice the politics that kept the wrong people in power. For 5 years, I was the quiet one, always on time, always prepared, never a complaint, never a rumor. My badge opened every door, but no one remembered my name. I liked it that way. At least, I thought I did. My boss, Edward Grant, the CEO, was the face of the company, polished, charming, ruthless when no one was looking. To the board, he was a visionary. To the rest of us, he was a man who played chess with people's lives. He had a rule: loyalty over skill, and his favorite player, his nephew Ryan Grant, the kind of guy who wore his last name like armor. Loud, entitled, the type who'd laugh in meetings without knowing why. Everyone knew he was the next rising star, not because of talent, but because of bloodline. I was assigned to train him. Me, the quiet employee no one noticed, teaching the CEO nephew how to do a job he'd already been promoted above. The first day we met, he smirked and said, "You've been here 5 years and still at the same desk. Must be cozy down here." I smiled politely, the way I always did. But inside, something shifted a crack, small but sharp. The thing about silence is, people mistake it for weakness. They think you're harmless, easy to step on. That's exactly what Edward and Ryan did. For months, they used me. Ryan took credit for my reports. Edward praised him in front of the board. They'd copied my entire proposal, once word for word, and presented it as a family collaboration. And me, I stayed quiet, observing, memorizing. Then, one evening, everything changed. It was late, nearly 9 p.m., and the office was empty except for the sound of the air conditioner humming. I was finalizing a quarterly report when the printer jammed. Cursing under my breath, I opened the paper tray and saw a half-printed document that wasn't mine. It was marked Confidential Board Revision. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Inside, I saw an internal memo: Ryan's upcoming promotion to Vice President of Operations. Effective next month, no qualifications, no review, just one sentence written in Edward's own hand. Clause 7 permits executive-level appointments under discretionary family trust. Clause 7. I had never seen that before. My mind raced. What was Clause 7? Why was it being used to fast-track his nephew's career? I scrolled through my own contract later that night, searching for any mention of it. And there it was, buried deep, page 17, section 7. In the event of internal misconduct or breach of ethical code, any employee may invoke Clause 7 to request an independent review by the Board of Trustees. It wasn't just a loophole, it was a weapon, and suddenly, my silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. For years, I'd watched them play their corporate chess, moving pawns, sacrificing honest people for their own gain. But now I had a move they didn't see coming. That night, I closed my laptop slowly. My reflection stared back at me in the dark screen, quiet, tired, invisible. I whispered to myself, "You wanted a game, Edward. Let's play." The next morning, I walked into the office just like every other day. Coffee in hand, neutral expression, invisible, but inside, everything had changed. They didn't know it yet, but Clause 7 was about to rewrite the rules of their empire. The first red flag came the next Monday morning. The office was buzzing. Everyone knew Ryan was getting a promotion, but officially, it wasn't announced yet. Still, he was walking around like the crown prince, greeting people, with that fake humility of someone who already knew the ending to the story. I watched him stroll into Edward's glass office, laughing. Edward's door was usually closed during meetings. That morning, it stayed open, like they wanted people to see the bond. Through the clear glass, I saw them clinking coffee mugs like old buddies, not a CEO and his junior executive. On Ryan's desk later that day sat a brand new tablet company, issued the kind reserved only for senior management. But Ryan wasn't in management, not yet. I didn't say anything, I just made a note. Then came the second red flag, the secret calls. It started subtle. Ryan would excuse himself from meetings, whispering into his phone in the hallway. Once I caught a few words as I passed. "Yeah, just transfer it under the training expense line, he won't check." He hung up when he saw me, smiling too fast. "Just client stuff, man, don't stress, client stuff, sure." By Thursday I noticed a pattern. His client calls always happened right after Edward left for lunch. Always lasted 10-15 minutes. Always ended with Ryan typing something furiously into his computer. And once, when he went to grab coffee, I saw his screen still glowing. A spreadsheet labeled Budget Allocation Q2 Draft. Only the numbers didn't add up. There were duplicate entries, same amounts under different departments. Marketing expense, community project, client engagement. All with round figures. $7,000, $7,000, $7,000. Too clean, too perfect. Like someone was moving money through shadows. I looked away, pretending not to care. But my pulse wouldn't slow down. The thing about corporate red flags is, they never wave alone. Once one shows up, others follow, quiet, coordinated, like a pattern you weren't supposed to notice. One afternoon, HR called me in. The manager, a soft-spoken woman named Janet, smiled politely but avoided my eyes. "Hey, we just need to confirm a few details on the department's last project report. There seem to be some inconsistencies." I frowned. "Inconsistencies?" She nodded, sliding a file across the desk. It was the quarterly analysis I'd written. But someone had modified it. My sections on budget risk and procurement delays were deleted, replaced by new text claiming all systems operating smoothly under Ryan Grant's leadership. Ryan's leadership. He wasn't even part of that project. "Who submitted this?" I asked. Janet hesitated. The file came directly from the CEO office. That hit harder than I expected. Edward, the man who'd once praised my quiet efficiency, had not only erased my work, but rewrote it to glorify his nephew. I forced a smile, understood, must have been a mix-up. But when I left the HR room, my hands were shaking. It wasn't about the credit. It was about integrity. Every report I'd ever submitted had my signature at the bottom, digital or not. If this was happening now, it meant my name could be used for anything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Edward's smooth voice during the last company meeting. "We rise by lifting family, and everyone here is family." But he didn't mean everyone. He meant his family. By the end of that week, I'd become invisible in a new way, the kind that hurts. Meetings started without me. Ryan's name appeared on documents I'd drafted. Even my desk phone began ringing less. Once, when I entered the break room, conversation stopped mid-sentence. People smiled too politely, looked away too fast. That's the thing about corporate betrayal. It never happens in one blow. It bleeds you slowly, until you start doubting your own worth. I started questioning myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just office politics. Maybe it wasn't betrayal, just bad luck. But then came the third red flag, the bonus discrepancy. HR released the quarterly bonus summary on Friday. Everyone got their digital slips. I opened mine, same modest number as always. But Ryan, who hadn't even finished his first project, walked around bragging about his record incentive. "Guess talent runs in the family, huh?" He laughed. I clenched my jaw, but what caught my attention wasn't the amount. It was his slip. He showed it off carelessly during lunch, and I caught a glimpse of the document header. Bonus authorization code, 7BXEXE, executive level. He wasn't even officially an executive yet, but the system already classified him as one. Someone had manually changed his employee tier, someone powerful enough to override HR systems. And I didn't have to guess who. That night, I stayed late again, last one in the building. The security guard, old Mr. Jenkins, gave me a half-smile as he locked the lobby doors. Another late one, huh, kid? Yeah, I said quietly, just trying to stay ahead. But the truth was, I wasn't working. I was investigating. I pulled up internal access logs. Every edit, every submission had a digital footprint. And just as I suspected, the falsified report, the budget sheets, even Ryan's bonus slip, all had Edward Grant's ID code attached. He wasn't just favoring his nephew. He was manipulating company systems to secure him power and money. Still, I couldn't act, not yet, because if I went public without proof, I'd be the one fired for defamation. So I did what quiet people do best. I observed and waited. 2 weeks later, Edward held a staff meeting. He stood before the company like a preacher before his congregation. In recognition of outstanding leadership and vision, he said proudly, "I'm promoting Ryan Grant to Vice President of Operations, effective immediately." The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Ryan smiled, shaking hands, playing the perfect air. I clapped too, because that's what you do when you're surrounded by wolves. But inside, something inside me broke, not in anger, in resolve. That night, I opened my contract again. Page 17, Section 7, Clause 7, the quiet weapon hiding in plain sight. It said any employee could invoke it in case of ethical misconduct or manipulation of company processes. The exact phrase I'd seen repeated across every falsified document, so I made a folder. I called it The Quiet Move. Every report, every call log, every screenshot, I saved them all. And as I stared at my computer screen, the reflection looking back wasn't tired anymore. It was calm. Focused, ready. "You built this game on lies, Edward." I whispered, "Let's see how you handle truth." The first move was made. And this time, silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. The day after Ryan's promotion, everything in the office felt colder. It wasn't just the air conditioning. It was the silence that follows injustice. The kind of silence where people look at you but don't see you, afraid your eyes might remind them of what fairness used to mean. Edward Grant's empire was glowing. His nephew was now vice president, his family line cemented in the company hierarchy. And me, I was still at the same desk, same position, same invisible seat. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't just sitting quietly anymore. I was watching. And that's how I found it. The betrayal I never expected. It started with a casual favor. The finance team needed help compiling Q3 projections, and since I had a reputation for precision, they handed me the raw files to cross-check. I wasn't supposed to see much, just numbers and invoices. But data has a way of talking when you know what to listen for. Halfway through the spreadsheet, I saw a line that didn't make sense. Transfer Project Titan Fund $450, 000, internal discretionary approval. The approving signature, Edward Grant. The request origin, Ryan Grant. Project Titan. I'd heard of it, a company. Funded mentorship program designed to recruit college interns. But as far as I knew, it was on hold due to budget restructuring. So why was nearly $500,000 being transferred into a frozen account? I opened the attached invoice. It listed a consulting agency, R.G. Enterprises LC, Ryan's initials. Curious, I ran the vendor check, standard procedure for payment verification. The company was newly registered, 3 months old, and the listed address, Ryan's apartment. That's when my hands went cold. He wasn't just being favored. He was laundering company funds through his own fake business, approved and protected by his uncle, the CEO. I checked the attached signatures. The digital authorization was encrypted, Edward's ID, time-stamped and valid. He'd approved everything. This wasn't favoritism anymore. It was corporate fraud, and I had proof. I sat there, frozen, staring at the screen as the truth burned through me like acid. For years I had believed keeping my head down, doing my job, and staying ethical would protect me. But in this glass tower, ethics were currency no one traded anymore. All those late nights, extra hours, quiet sacrifices, they had all built this. A fortress of lies with a family name engraved at the top. I felt my chest tighten, my breath caught. For the first time in 5 years, I wanted to scream. Instead, I minimized the window, closed the file, and stared at my reflection on the black screen. My face looked calm, my eyes didn't. They stole the company from the inside. I whispered, and they used silence to do it. For a moment, I thought about walking into Edward's office and confronting him right then and there. But then I saw it. Ryan walking past my cubicle, laughing on the phone. "Yeah, Uncle Ed signed it already. It's done. We'll split the rest later," he said, not even lowering his voice. Split the rest later. That line hit me like a hammer. It wasn't just nepotism. It was a partnership. A family crime ring dressed in business suits. My hand curled into a fist. But rage without proof is just noise. And I'd spent years mastering silence. So instead of exploding, I started collecting. Every transfer, every timestamp, every signature, and then I found something I wasn't supposed to, a memo marked succession plan. It was tucked inside Edward's public drive, disguised as a project archive. But the file title had a strange ending. Q3 Budget Final 7, DocX. That 7 caught my eye. I opened it. Inside wasn't a budget. It was a will, not a legal will, a corporate one. Edward had drafted a CEO succession proposal, granting his nephew full control of operations within 6 months, regardless of board approval. He even cited Clause 7 as justification, twisting it into something it was never meant to be. The clause meant to protect employees from corruption was being rewritten to protect corruption itself. And at the bottom of the document, beneath a string of signatures, was mine. My signature, forged. That was the moment my silence ended. I don't remember standing up, but I did. My chair slammed into the floor as I stared at the monitor. For years, I'd worked like a machine, no shortcuts, no gossip, no complaints. I believed effort mattered. That integrity meant something, but right there, staring at my falsified signature, I realized the truth. They'd been using my name to make their lies look clean. Every time Edward praised my flawless reports, every pat on the shoulder, every quiet good job, it wasn't respect. It was camouflage. I was the quiet, trustworthy employee, the perfect face for their corruption. They used my record, my credibility, to legitimize fraud. That's not just betrayal. That's theft of identity. I sat back down, trembling. My throat felt tight, my chest heavy. For the first time, I understood what heartbreak felt like, not from love, but from losing faith in what you once stood for. I could have gone to HR, but HR reported directly to Edward. I could have gone to the board, but the board only saw what Edward showed them. So I turned to the only thing they couldn't manipulate, Clause 7, the same clause they'd twisted, the same clause they thought no one would ever use. I opened my email and began drafting a formal complaint. Subject: Invocation of Clause 7 Ethical Misconduct Inquiry. I paused halfway through typing. If I sent this now, they'd bury me before the board ever saw it. My access could be revoked, my evidence wiped. I needed something stronger, something public, something they couldn't silence. So instead of sending it, I started creating a second folder, encrypted, time, stamped, backed up offsite, labeled Clause 7 Truth Archive. In it, I placed everything: documents, invoices, falsified memos, even audio snippets I'd quietly recorded over the weeks. Every lie had a digital footprint, and soon those footprints would lead straight to the CEO desk. The next morning, Edward called me into his office. He smiled the way rich men do when they think they've already won. "You've been doing great work, son," he said. "In fact, we're considering restructuring your role, maybe move you under Ryan's team. Closer supervision, better growth opportunities." Closer supervision, translation, keep him where we can control him. I nodded. "That sounds great, sir." He leaned back, pleased. "Good man. Loyalty like yours is rare. The company trusts you." As I turned to leave, I glanced at the chessboard on his shelf, crystal pieces, all perfectly arranged. Except the king was missing. Edward noticed my look and smirked. "Never play the king until you're sure of your move," he said. I smiled back. "Don't worry, sir, I never move without reason." And as I walked out, the realization hit me. He thought I was still his pawn. He had no idea I'd already planned checkmate. The day Edward offered to promote me under Ryan's supervision was the day something inside me changed. Until that moment, my silence had been a shield, a way to survive in a world built on politics and power plays. But when you realize your silence is the reason injustice thrives, it stops being safety. It becomes complicity. That night, I sat in my small apartment, staring at the city lights outside my window, each one flickering like a heartbeat, alive with stories of people just trying to make it. I'd always thought doing the right thing meant keeping your head down and letting karma take care of the rest. But karma, I'd learned, doesn't visit the quiet. You have to invite it in, and that's when the shift began. My hands trembled as I reopened the clause, 7 Truth Archive. Line by line, file by file, I reviewed every piece of evidence I had gathered: the forged signature, the secret payments, the budget manipulations, the fake company. For the first time, I wasn't looking at it as an observer. I was looking at it as a witness. Every document was a scar. Every email a confession. The heartbreak I'd felt began to twist, not into anger, but into clarity. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. Ryan and Edward had built an empire on lies, but they'd underestimated the one person who'd been in the room the entire time, the one they thought was harmless. The quiet one. I remembered Edward's words, "Never play the king until you're sure of your move." He'd said it like a threat. But to me, it sounded like permission. I didn't want to be king. I just wanted to end the game. 2 days later, it happened. The trigger I didn't know I was waiting for. It was a Friday morning. The office was buzzing with celebration. Banners hung in the hallway. "Congratulations, Ryan Grant, Vice President of Operations." Catered lunch, champagne, even a short speech from the CEO himself. I stood in the back, blending into the crowd like always. Ryan took the mic, drunk on praise. "This company is a family," he said, "and I owe everything to my uncle, my mentor, and to my amazing team, especially the ones who have guided me quietly behind the scenes." His eyes found me. He smiled that same rehearsed smile. "You know who you are." Laughter followed, applause, cameras flashed. And at that moment, I realized he wasn't thanking me. He was mocking me. The man who stole my work, my credibility, my future, now wanted me to clap for my own humiliation. Something inside me snapped. The heartbreak evaporated. The silence burned away. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to be invisible. I wanted to be heard. I left the celebration early and walked straight to the IT department. The one place people rarely questioned technical requests. I told the technician I needed temporary admin access for a compliance audit, under Edward's instruction. The keyword compliance worked like magic. Within 10 minutes, I had elevated system access and a portable drive. When I got home, I plugged it in. All the digital locks that once protected Edward's secrets began to fall away. Encrypted files, hidden emails, all of it came flooding out. Proof of years of internal favoritism, tampered reports, and money funneled into shell companies. Each file told a story. Each story had my name buried somewhere inside it. The quiet employee whose spotless record made every lie believable. And as I read through them, something strange happened. I stopped feeling small. I remembered my first day at the company, a young, nervous employee shaking Edward's hand, believing he'd found a mentor. I remembered staying late to meet deadlines, rewriting proposals that Ryan ruined, fixing mistakes no one ever saw. And I realized my silence hadn't been weakness. It had been patience. They thought I was beneath them, but I had been standing right beside their secrets all along. That's when I decided I wouldn't destroy them in anger. I'd let the truth do it for me. By Sunday, the plan was clear. I would invoke Clause 7 officially, formally, publicly, but not through email or HR. No, I'd use the one channel Edward couldn't control, the board's independent review server. Only 2 people had access to upload files there, the compliance director and Edward himself. But with the admin clearance I'd obtained, I could bypass that restriction. The board met quarterly. The next meeting was in 5 days. That's when I'd strike. But this wasn't just about exposure. I wanted them to feel what I'd felt, the helplessness of being unheard, unseen, underestimated. So I didn't plan a dramatic reveal or confrontation. I planned a checkmate by silence. I created a single file, Clause 7 report. PDF, inside, I summarized every violation with attached proof, timestamps, and a statement of personal witness. But before uploading, I recorded a short video, just 60 seconds. In it, I said calmly, "For years, I stayed quiet because I believed hard work spoke louder than politics. But when silence becomes the weapon of the corrupt, truth must raise its voice. This is not revenge, this is accountability. Employee ID #7726. No name, no face, just the voice of the quiet one they never noticed." Then I encrypted it, timestamped it, and set it to upload automatically during the board's meeting. The system clock ticked softly on my screen. For the first time in years, I felt peace. That night, I stood on my balcony, the city humming below me. The same skyline that once made me feel small now looked different, like a battlefield I'd finally learned how to navigate. I wasn't scared anymore, not of losing my job, not of being alone, because sometimes you have to lose your place in a corrupt system to find your place in the truth. It hit me then, strength isn't about being loud, it's about being unshakable. The quiet employee wasn't quiet anymore. He was focused, unstoppable. I whispered into the night, "You thought my silence meant defeat, Edward, but it was the sound of your countdown." The storm had begun, and no one even saw the clouds forming. I'd spent the last few days watching them celebrate as if the company belonged to them already. Ryan walked taller, Edward smiled wider, the board applauded, blind to the rot beneath the lacquer. They were right to feel invincible, because they had convinced themselves the system was theirs to bend. That was my advantage. I didn't have Hollywood theatrics planned. No dramatic confrontations in glass foyers. I designed a plan that relied on 3 things they couldn't erase: paper trails, time, stamped digital proof, and the rules they themselves had written into the company bylaws. Clause 7, their own clause, the weapon and the trap in one. Here's how I built the trap, step by deliberate step. I already had the core pieces: forged memos, sneaky transfers, invoices pointing to R.G. Enterprises, and a succession proposal that read like a confession. But evidence is only as strong as how you present it. Scattered files looked like coincidence. A curated dossier looks like a pattern. So I organized everything into layers: primary documents, original files with timestamps, transfer approvals, the forged succession plan, and emails showing Edward's digital sign-off. Corroborative items, payroll logs, vendor registration records, screenshots of Ryan's apartment address tied to the shell company, and the duplicate budget entries. Witness context, timestamps of Ryan's client calls, logs showing edits during Edward's lunch breaks, and my own notes on meetings where my work was overwritten. Every file was annotated with where I'd found it and why it mattered. No assumptions, no accusations without traceable evidence. I duplicated the whole archive 3 times, an encrypted drive hidden in my apartment, a cloud backup I disguised as a personal student portfolio, and a third copy uploaded to a neutral offsite server with strict access controls. If they tried to wipe the company systems, the truth would outlive them. Proof without narrative is noise. The board wouldn't pore over raw spreadsheets. They'd read a clear, concise brief. So I wrote a report that told a story, not a rant, but a documented chain of misconduct. I labeled it Invocation of Clause 7, Request for Independent Investigation, and then laid out the facts in numbered sections: timeline, supporting documents, implicated parties, and requested actions, independent forensic audit, temporary suspension of implicated individuals, pending review, each claim linked to the exact file in my archive. But I didn't stop there. I prepared 2 additional packages, one tailored for the compliance director legal language, auditor contacts, and one for the board, a short executive summary with irrefutable highlights. The board gets one sheet, the kind they can't ignore. The compliance director gets the kitchen sink. If Edward thought I'd upload the files from my workstation, he'd shut me out before the board meeting. If I walked into HR with a printed stack, they'd vanish into the underground with the files before anyone saw them. So I used misdirection. I planted decoy edits in the company's public project folders, innocuous changes that looked like routine housekeeping. They were crumbs leading nowhere, a sloppy edit here, a mislabeled spreadsheet there, small things that would reassure Edward he'd caught a novice. Those decoys had 2 purposes: to distract their internal audit team and to make the real activity stand out in system logs as something unusual. Then I set the real trap: a scheduled upload to the board's independent review server timed during the quarterly meeting. That server required 2-factor confirmation, something Edward controlled. But companies are built for oversight, not secrecy. There's always a gatekeeper, the compliance director. She would get automatic alerts anytime a large file submission arrived outside of normal channels. So I timed my upload to coincide with when the board would be reviewing budgets and when their attention would be on numbers and quarterly targets, not on an incoming whistleblower package. The notification would ping the compliance director's phone and email, forcing a procedural review. Once the review started, protocols required a temporary freeze on implicated accounts until the review concluded. That freeze would lock Edward's ability to scrub the very files that implicated him. No plan survives without people. I needed allies, not noisy ones, but people whose roles gave them a procedural obligation to act. I approached 2 quietly. Janet from HR, the woman who'd once slid the altered report across the desk with that apologetic look. She had always been careful, but she had a conscience. I didn't threaten her. I showed her a small sampling, a redacted invoice, and the timestamp of Edward's approval, just enough to make her uncomfortable and remind her of her duty. She didn't promise to join me, but she stopped laughing at Ryan's jokes. Mr. Jenkins, the night guard, an old man with a camera-trained memory. He'd been locking the building for years and had seen people come in and out at odd hours. I gave him a way to help that didn't involve confrontation, just to keep his log accurate and, if asked, to confirm that the CO car left at a particular time on a particular night. Small things, yet they compounded. I also reached out, indirectly, to a compliance consultant I'd found through a forum for corporate auditors. I didn't tell him names, I just asked, what does a board look for when it receives a Clause 7 invocation? He answered, time-stamped originals, chain of custody, and independence of the complainant. I used his checklist to double-check my dossier. Facts are powerful, but in the age of PR, nothing beats a human voice. I didn't want to be a martyr, but I wanted to ensure someone heard me if the company tried to erase the files. So I recorded a short, controlled statement, the same one I planned to attach to the Clause 7 submission. No melodrama, no accusations without facts, just a calm voice, a readout of the key dates, and a declaration that any attempt to tamper would be documented and reported to external regulators. Then I encrypted the video and set the board upload to trigger 2 backups, one to the offsite server public, facing, secure, and one to a secure Dropbox monitored by an independent legal firm I'd contacted under a false business name. If the board server received the file and then the company tried to scrub it, the backups would ensure the file had already left the company's orbit. Through all of this, I had to act normal more than normal. I volunteered for tasks, laughed at the right jokes, and accepted Ryan's fake praise without flinching. Edward continued to treat me like a dependable cog. He'd booked my supposed move under Ryan as a personnel win, proof his empire worked. He felt untouchable because he was, for now, that's what made the plan dangerous and elegant. He'd grown bold and sloppy in his belief that family could rewrite the rules. My job was to make his confidence work against him, to force the company's own protocols to activate and protect the truth. The board meeting was in 3 days. I checked the archive one last time. Every file, every annotation, every timestamp had been reviewed and cross-checked. The decoys were in place, the backups were encrypted, the video was cued. Janet's silent discomfort was a small, quiet comfort. Mr. Jenkins kept his log precise. As I closed my laptop, I felt something rare, a fierce, clean calm. The heartbreak that had once made my hands shake was gone. In its place was something sharper, purpose. Edward would walk into that meeting believing he controlled the conversation. He'd expect applause, not paperwork. He didn't know the company had already been given the question it could not afford to ignore. I walked into the building that morning, and the elevator hummed like it always did. People smiled, oblivious. Ryan strut past me like a man who had the future in his pocket. I smiled back. "Enjoy the meeting," he said, not looking me in the eye. I nodded. "I will." I said, because I had a date with protocol and Clause 7 was the invitation. The boardroom smelled like polished wood and expensive coffee, the kind of scent that makes people forget the things they should be ashamed of. Today it would smell different. Today it would taste like iron, the metallic tang of truth. The meeting started on time. Chairs scraped. Paper folders were handed out. Edward walked in first, chest out, the portrait of confidence. He smiled at the board like a man greeting a choir he'd trained. Ryan followed, waving as if the world were his applause. What they didn't expect was a single alert pinging the compliance director's phone at 10:07 a.m. Janet looked down at her screen. Her face changed color the way the sun changes a cloud. She excused herself and, with hands that didn't tremble as much as mine once did, announced the procedural review. "Board members," she said, voice steady enough to be heard across the table, "we've received a formal invocation under Clause 7 requesting an independent investigation. The submission includes claims of ethical misconduct, internal fraud, and evidence of tampered documents. By regulation, we must pause any transactions and access permissions related to implicated accounts pending review." A soft, incredulous laugh escaped Edward, clipped like a lie. "Janet, this is preposterous." Who even? The compliance director ignored him and tapped the secure portal. On the big screen that hung above the mahogany table, a file name appeared. Clause 7 Report. PDF submitted 10/07/2022-10/05/23 employee ID #7726. The board's chairman, who had been about to speak, found his throat tight. I watched them from the edge of the room, breathing steady. My heart was a drum that had learned to be silent when it mattered most. The file began to open. First, the invoice trail. H$700 00 entry, each duplicate line highlighted in red, each vendor registration with Ryan's apartment listed as the business address. The screen filled with evidence that had once lived only in my folder. Eyes flicked to Edward. His smile faltered. Then came the bomb. The forged succession proposal with my signature inserted like a stamp of legitimacy. The timestamp showed edits made late at night, when the security cameras recorded only Edward's parking access. A timestamp, Mr. Jenkins had confirmed in his log. Janet clicked to the video clip. A grainy image showed a valet badge, the CEO car leaving at 11:42 p.m. on the night the document was saved. "You can't," Edward began, voice thin. He lunged for his tablet, but the system locked his admin credentials. A procedural freeze, automatic, irrevocable, and activated the moment the Clause 7 submission triggered the compliance check. The room smelled of bloodless panic. Ryan's face drained of color. The smug laugh he'd worn like a second skin evaporated. His hands fidgeted with a pen that scribbled meaningless circles. Edward's jaw worked like a trapped animal's. Janet clicked again, the screen filled with a folder labeled R.G. Enterprises LLC, the vendor application, the bank transfers, then, like a guillotine, the export audit. IP addresses showing the authorization originated from Edward's secure terminal, not from any delegate. The system logs proved the approvals were made under his login at 12:03 a.m., but the geotag placed the login in an off-site location the CEO would struggle to explain. The chairman of the board, a man who'd once praised Edward's vision, sat frozen, fingers worrying a napkin. He asked the single question every man with power fears: has legal been notified? Before Janet could answer, my backup plan, the lawyer Dropbox, pinged the room's secure line. A verified legal clerk's voice, calm and professional, stated they had received an authenticated copy of the Clause 7 submission and the supporting archive, and that, per whistleblower protocol, they would notify regulators if the board did not initiate an immediate independent forensic audit. A silence heavier than any applause gripped the room. Edward tried one last gambit charm. "This is a smear, manufactured by a disgruntled employee. We'll handle this internally." He smiled a practiced, oily smile. But the board could see the server logs. They could see the backups. They could see the timestamps that matched my voice recording. The evidence had already left the building. Board members exchanged looks. Lawyers whispered. Phones were consulted. The chairman cleared his throat and, for the first time since I'd known him, took a position that wasn't in Edward's pocket. Given the gravity of these allegations and the procedural evidence presented, I am calling for an immediate temporary suspension of Mr. Grant pending the outcome of the independent audit. He said. Edward's face crumpled not from shame, but from the sudden loss of the certainty that had guided his every move. Ryan tried to stand to stake his claim, but hands held him in his chair. Security, who'd been briefed to let this play out quietly, moved to escort Edward from the room, carefully, with the kind of dignity the company once traded in. Outside the boardroom, cameras already waited. Someone in PR panicked, tried to spin a line about internal review. The first tweets hit, then the newswire. Within an hour, shareholders were calling, markets murmured, and the company's stock, that invisible, brittle thing that measures confidence, dipped in a way that felt like a public shiver. But the real blow came when the forensic auditors called in their specialists, banking investigators who spoke in acronyms and file hashes. They asked for bank cooperation, subpoenaed records, and put legal holds on accounts. The transfers I'd documented were frozen. The shell company's account showed withdrawals that traced back to personal expenses: a luxury rental, a private school tuition payment, an overseas wire, all tied to Ryan's name. He tried to bargain, he tried to point fingers. It was authorization, he said, he signed. but the signatures were logged, and the timestamps placed master control in Edward's hands. It felt cinematic because it played out like a film. Slow motion shock at the table, rapid. Fire legal procedure in the hallways. The CEO practiced authority, stripped away into legalese, and evidence. The quiet employees who'd long endured nods and small talk watched Edward walk past them, escorted, like any other man now exposed to the weather. Later that day, corporate security informed me quietly that my access would remain intact, as it must for the investigation. Janet found me in the stairwell, eyes wet but strong. "You did the right thing," she said. "You gave us no choice." I wanted to say something heroic, but the words felt small. Instead, I nodded. The weight of what I'd done pressed into my chest, heavy but clean. I had broken the silence the corrupt had relied upon. By evening, news outlets had pieces about the Clause 7 whistleblower and speculation about the CEO sudden suspension. Regulators confirmed they'd opened an inquiry. The company's PR drafted an awkward apology that tried to keep family and business separate, the very idea now shredded. At home, I watched the footage of Edward leaving the building. His face pale, the suit that had defined him suddenly too large. Ryan's face was on 100 feeds, youthful, startled, accused. For a moment, a tiny human thing flickered across his expression, fear. The climax wasn't as clean as a movie often makes it. There were lawyers to be hired, statements to be given, and a long, drawn-out audit that would take months. There would be lawyers and courtrooms and heated hearings. There would be fallout, jobs lost, reputations shredded, families strained. But in that moment, watching the empire crack like glass, something pure happened. The people who'd been swallowed by the machine started to look at one another with fresh eyes. The same eyes I'd seen in the mirror when I finally decided to act. I sat alone on my couch late that night, the city lights a dizzying grid. My phone buzzed with messages, some gratitude, some fear, some petty questions from those who couldn't bear discomfort. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel, relief. Not because I'd enjoyed the downfall, I hadn't, but because the quiet work of truth had been done. The system they trusted to hide in had turned against them, because they'd assumed their power made them immune. Clause 7 was no longer a clause buried in page 17. It was a mirror, and as I scrolled through the headlines, one line stuck. When protocol becomes the weapon of the people, there's nowhere for a lie to hide. The king had been toppled not by spectacle, but by the slow, clinical force of evidence. The final move had been made. The boardroom was no longer a theater of applause. It was a courtroom waiting to happen. The storm had broken, and in its wake, glass rained down, sharp, bright, and true. 3 months passed since the day the boardroom cracked open, and the truth spilled out like broken glass. Grant & Co. was no longer the same. The empire Edward had built on loyalty and lies had fallen, not with explosions, but with silence that no one could deny. The investigation made headlines across every major business outlet. CEO suspended amid nepotism scandal. Whistleblower Clause 7 invoked in landmark corporate case. The same clause Edward once weaponized for family favoritism now became the instrument of his undoing. Edward Grant, the man who thought himself untouchable, faced his first public hearing 2 weeks after the audit began. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. He arrived flanked by attorneys, chin lifted, trying to project confidence, but the mask couldn't hold. The prosecutors laid everything bare: the fake invoices, the internal transfers, the shell company under his nephew's name. The money trail was undeniable. Every transaction bore his authorization. Every forgery carried his silence. Ryan sat behind him, pale and sunken, a shadow of the arrogant prince he'd been. He'd signed a plea deal, trading testimony for leniency. Family loyalty, the same thing Edward had corrupted the company for, shattered under pressure. When the judge read the charges of fraud, corporate misconduct, and breach of fiduciary duty, Edward didn't argue. He just stared ahead hollow, like a man watching his reflection crumble. Ryan turned, met his uncle's eyes once, and looked away. Even in the fall, the family betrayed itself. The company's stock plummeted at first, panic, uncertainty, but slowly, something unexpected happened. Investors began to trust again. Transparency became the new buzzword. The board, embarrassed and humbled, restructured everything. New compliance officers, ethics training, and most notably, a plaque installed in the lobby engraved with just 4 words. Integrity outlasts power always. Irony had a sense of poetry. I never planned to be a hero. I just wanted the truth to matter again. The board reached out weeks later, asking me to return to work. They offered a promotion, head of compliance, the very position Edward once mocked as a paper pusher's dream. But I didn't take it. Some victories don't need titles, they need peace. Instead, I accepted a consulting role, independent, on my own terms. My job was to help companies build internal checks to prevent exactly what had happened at Grant & Co. I started small, firms, startups, organizations trying to build better systems from the ground up. For once, my voice was heard not because I shouted, but because I had earned silence that people respected. The whispers of the quiet employee had become the echoes of accountability. One morning, months later, I received a letter, handwritten, trembling, from Edward Grant. He was out on bail, awaiting sentencing. The letter began with the words, "I was wrong." He wrote about how silence made him believe he was smarter than morality, how he mistook control for success, and how the company he built had become his prison. "I used to think power was about making moves," he wrote, "but it was about knowing when to stop." He ended with, "You didn't destroy me. You freed the truth. I hope you never stay quiet again." I folded the letter once and kept it in my desk drawer. Not as forgiveness, but as a reminder of what silence can cost when it protects the wrong side. Life slowed down after that. I moved to a smaller apartment overlooking the harbor, quiet mornings, long walks, the sound of water instead of office noise. Sometimes I'd catch news snippets about the Clause 7 case becoming a legal precedent. Universities started teaching it as part of corporate ethics. Journalists called it the case where silence spoke louder than money. That phrase stuck with me. Because it was true, silence can destroy you or save you, depending on who commands it. Ryan, as part of his plea agreement, was banned from holding executive positions for 10 years. He moved out of state, reportedly working under another name. Edward lost everything of the company, the wealth, the control, but gained something he'd never had, humility. I didn't hate them. Hate is noise, and I'd learned that real power doesn't come from screaming. It comes from knowing you don't need to anymore. Sometimes when I walk past the old Grant & Co. building, I see new faces behind the glass. The name has changed, Grant Corp Ethical Solutions. The irony doesn't sting, it smiles. They say the new leadership built a Clause 7 integrity fund to support whistleblowers and fund transparency in corporate governance. The same clause they buried, the same clause they twisted, now saving others from the same fate. And that, I suppose, is justice. Not revenge, not ruin, but the world quietly learning the lesson they ignored. I stood once outside the building, the city lights reflecting in the windows like 1,000 unspoken stories, and I whispered to myself, not in anger, but in peace, "You played your game with kings and pawns, Edward, but you forgot, even the quietest piece on the board can checkmate the king." That line stayed with me, a poetic full stop on years of manipulation. Because this wasn't about destruction anymore. It was about truth coming home, and truth always comes home. If you're still here, listening, maybe you've been through something like this. Maybe someone used your kindness as weakness, your silence as submission, or your loyalty as their ladder. Remember this: you don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to destroy to win. You just have to see, to wait, and to move when truth demands it. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's justice wrapped in patience. If this story hit you somewhere deep, drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever faced betrayal from someone who thought you were too quiet to fight back? I want to hear your story. Because stories like this, they remind the world that silence is not surrender, it's preparation. And if you believe truth always finds a way, hit that subscribe button. Because more stories like this, more voices that rise from quiet, they deserve to be heard. They built their empire on silence, but I turned silence into their sentence.